Good Friday morning. Let's jump into a new episode of the Spot Up Pod. I am recording. I know this is coming out on Friday morning, but I am recording this on Thursday afternoon. So I just want to kind of give you a recap of what's been happening with the San Antonio Spurs. So this week was officially training camp week for the Spurs. So I was actually in San Antonio on Monday. At media day, so I was there and I got to catch up with some of my friends in the media. On that day, the Spurs provided Coach Pop to speak to the media, as well as 6 different players. And then throughout the week, the team has been having practices for their first training camp. And then after those practices, the Spurs usually send out about 2 to 3 players to speak with the media following those practices. And so what I've done today for this episode is, I know it's like a lot of quotes that have happened. So if you want to read the full quotes, you should definitely check out this Spot Up Shot newsletter over on Substack. That's where I usually write up whatever the players or the coaches said, and I put that up on Substack. But what I'm gonna do today is kind of just take some big takeaways, either overall for the team, or some specific players I'm going to go through, just kind of what other players said about those players, because again, it's only been basically practices, and a lot of those are closed off practices to the public, so we don't actually see exactly what rotations are being used right now, how the players look with their shots and things like that. So again, we got to kind of wait till the preseason actually starts next week. So what I'm going to do is just kind of go through different quotes from players and coaches here. So one of the big topics that's come out, of course, is the lineups. We're all eager to see who do the Spurs start, who's the next 5 off of the bench. And of course, the players and Coach Pop did not provide any kind of hints in the few interviews that they've provided some answers regarding the lineup. So on Monday at media day, Coach Pop was basically asked about whether or not Stephon Castle might fit in, where he might fit in the lineup, and Pop really didn't give any kind of hints. He basically backed away from that answer. Said he needs to see the players play out there. He also said the only guaranteed starter for sure is Victor Wembanyama, but of course we do expect that most likely Chris Paul is probably going to start at the point. Harrison Barnes will probably start at the 3, Jeremy Sochan at the 4, and of course Wemby's going to start at the 5. So really, the more particular question is who's going to start in place of Devin Vassell, who is going to be injured to start the beginning of the season. So that's kind of the key question here. And even the players were very much didn't really give any kind of answers about who who's going to be in which lineups. Julian Champagnie, when asked about hey, the fact that there's an opening there at the starting shooting guard spot, what do you think about possibly getting those minutes? He basically said he didn't mind whether he gets the starting job like last year or whether he comes off the bench. He basically just wants to play and help the team win. So he gave a very safe answer, not saying he's not prioritizing trying to get that starting spot right now while Vassell is out. Malaki Branham, when asked about the kind of lineups that he's in, he basically said the team has been using different teams every day. And then also who was this Wemby on Thursday in one of his interviews, he basically said that he goes, we've mixed up positions and teams. So basically again, the players don't really have their lineup set, or at least they're not telling us who's supposed to be the starting 5. And then even in some of the footage that the team did send out to the media, we see different units going 5-on-5 against each other, but it's not like the units that we would think are going to be in the the starting 5, or they're kind of just mixed in there, like Wemby said there. So again, early on, this question of who's going to be the starting 5 and then which players are coming off the bench, we kind of just still got to wait until the games actually start next week to kind of get a better hint of what that's going to look like. The next player I want to talk about is Wemby. So what I'm going to do here is, again, go through kind of what the big takeaways of what was said about him from different players and Coach Pop, and then also what Wemby himself has said in some of these interviews. So regarding the Olympics, so we saw that Wemby went to the Olympics this past summer representing Team France. They did a very good job as far as getting all the way to the gold medal game. They lost to Team USA in the final few minutes because of Steph Curry. And so France did get the silver medal. I mean, they surpassed expectations even by getting the silver medal. And so when Pop was asked about Wemby's experience, he basically said that he really liked how competitive and physical it was for Victor to get that experience so early on. He called it like a petri dish. And so that was a good experience for Wemby, according to Pop. Wemby, on his own Olympic experience, he mentioned this as part of one of his quotes. He said, "One of maybe the most intense sports experiences of my life." So again, we know the Spurs aren't quite there yet at like championship contender status. That might not still happen for a few years from now. So at least Victor got that taste of, what is it like to be in that ultra competitive environment, going for a gold medal. And he got to experience that at these past Olympics. So again, that's why he called it one of the most intense sports experiences of his life. Some things that Wemby said he's worked on. He really said that he went back to fundamentals and really just worked on different kind of fundamentals this offseason. Specifically, he mentioned finishing, just how that's one thing that, is going to be there for him if he could just really hone it in, that skill. And then he also mentioned how, he wants to continue to do what we saw last season, where, last season when the season first started, he was kind of taking different shot selections, some rim attempts, some threes, some mid rangers. And then as we saw when he became the starting center, and then all the way toward the end of the season, he got a little bit better as far as focusing on specifically rim and 3-point shots, and he was taking less mid rangers. And so that's something that he knows. He said he has said that he's seen the analytics. He knows what the data says, that analytically rims and threes are better shots than those mid rangers. And so that's something that he said he continues to want to work on, is trying to get to the easiest place of the basket, which is the rim. But that's also not always the easiest thing to do, because that's the one thing that defenses are trying to do, is keep you away from, as far as their one of their main targets is to keep a player off the, away from the basket. So again, that's one of the areas where he's already just showing something that he showed last season, is that he's very aware of what the analytics say, that, threes and rim attacks are much better than, having to take those contested mid rangers. And so that's another notable element about Victor. Harrison Barnes, what he had to say about Victor, he just, basically said that, his potential, is still very much unknown. Here's part of one of his quotes. He said, "There's not anything he cannot do." And so Barnes also said, the Spurs, one of their jobs as players, as teammates of Victor, is to try to, help him get to his potential, kind of reach that ceiling of just going as high as he can in his talent level. And the Spurs, as his teammates, need to be here to help him do that. Jeremy Sochan also had a very interesting answer about Victor, about as far as like helping him defensively. So, Sochan knows that, he might sometimes play down in the paint, whether he's guarding like a power forward or center, or there's going to be nights when the Spurs need him to guard guards and wings out there on the perimeter. And he's basically saying that in those instances when he's like up top, or even just any of the teammates are up top, and Victor has to swing over to protect the paint, that the Spurs need to work on their team defense and communicating and making sure that they rotate toward Wemby's man. When Victor's sliding over, there's going to be, his original man still open under the basket. So Sohan's talking about how the Spurs need to make sure they're communicating and someone's shifting over to cover Wemby's man, whether that's boxing him out or just putting a body on him. And so that was something interesting to hear from Sochan, that, part of this team defensive concept is not just about, having this great defensive player in Wemby, but it's also about helping him out. So that way, when he does, help those players out and, and contest at the rim, then someone's there to help him out as well. Something that a lot of different players mention is that they have seen some strength. Wemby's definitely added some muscle to his frame this past offseason. And so they say that he just early on in these practices, they are seeing that it's harder to push him off his spots. I think it was Zach Collins who said that, he's not taking as many of those like fading, forced fading away kind of jump shots now. He can kind of get the form and the set that he wants to take. And so that's something that the players mentioned about Wemby, is how he's gotten stronger. And then finally, Stephon Castle, who's going to get, he's finally got his first experience of playing with Wemby, at least in practices right now. He's just saying that, defensively, one of the things that he's really good at, Stephon, is that it's really it opens up more freedom for him out of the perimeter to kind of just, put more ball pressure on those offensive players. Really, try to go in for steals or deflections, because now he knows that he has some security back there in the paint, knowing that he has a player like Victor back there to protect the rim in case he gets beat. He can take more gambles now. And then something he mentioned about going from having, playing with Donovan Klinging at UConn, throwing him alley-oops. Now he has an even bigger target in Wemby, who's like 7'5" here, who he can throw the ball up to in the air. And the fact that Wemby's, arms can just reach all over the place. He has a bigger radius there to catch those balls and, try to finish them, near the rim. So again, that was something that different players and Coach Pop said about Wemby so far going into this new season. The next player who a lot of players and Coach Pop talked about was Chris Paul, one of the future Hall of Fame point guards that the team added over the summer. So one thing that Pop mentioned was that just like how Paul's definitely going to bring that leadership skill to the team. He has a very high basketball IQ. Pop mentioned how, over the years coaching against Paul, it was always frustrating because he and other coaches can just tell that Paul's always, a few steps ahead of him. And so they're having to like try to outthink him when he's that point guard on the floor, seeing everything. Something that Devin Vassell mentioned was that he kind of wants to learn from Paul in terms of how to play make, whether it's out of the pick and roll, what is Paul exactly seeing, how is he reading defenses, and that's something that Vassell, to become a better ball handler and playmaker for the team, he wants to continue to add to his game by watching Paul. Stephon Castle also mentioned something similar about already just in these first few days of being out on the floor with Paul. He's kind of watching what he's doing, whether he's on the ball or off the ball, and how it's just been a little bit easier to play with Paul there on the floor. As far as Paul, what he said about why why he chose San Antonio. Of course, he's here to help mentor the young players, but for him, he really said that it's just a great opportunity for at least at this stage of his career, a place to get real minutes, real playing time, really have a bigger role than just being a veteran coming off the bench and being guiding these young players. He really wants to have a role and play basketball. He basically he said he wants to hoop. He even left his family to spend some time in San Antonio to during the season to actually play out there. And so again, he wants to not just be this veteran mentor for the players. He actually wants to be an integral part of this team and really have a big role on this team. So that was something interesting to hear about why Paul chose San Antonio. Something Zach Collins mentioned about Paul was that Zach went back to last season where he says, there was a lot of games where the Spurs were up big, maybe 10, 15 points. And then, the other team would come back on them. And of course they ended up losing that game most of the time. Or there was nights where the other team would go on a big run and the Spurs would kind of just fall apart and, they would end up losing these games. And so he's saying that having a player like Paul, who's a veteran player, can ease down the team when they get a little bit sporadic, whether it's on offense or defense. He says, that's really going to help in those close game situations. That's something Zach mentioned. Trey Jones mentioned how great of a pick and roll player that Paul is. And he kind of mentioned how the majority of this league is still a very pick and roll heavy league. And so it's good to have him out there. And then some role players who need a solid point guard out there to kind of direct traffic out there are Jeremy Sochan and Julian Champagnie. Both players just said how Chris Paul has just made the game already easier for them. Just the fact that they can go into their roles. He's showing them exactly where to be, where the best spots for them to be out on the floor on offense. And so that's in that Sochan and Champagnie mentioned about Paul. So again, a lot of praise for Paul coming from the players and Coach Pop as well. The next player who a lot of players have discussed and also Coach Pop is Harrison Barnes. So one thing Pop mentioned is that he said that over the last few years that he's actually wanted the Spurs to try to add Barnes to the team, whether I don't know if that was whether via trade or maybe when he was a free agent, but over the years, once Pop got to have some experience with Barnes on Team USA for one of the summers when Pop was the head coach of Team USA, he mentioned that was just definitely a player that he would like the Spurs to add to the organization. And so finally this past offseason when the opportunity was there for them to trade for Barnes, they did obviously do that. Barnes, one thing he mentioned is that obviously he's going to bring his leadership skills to this young team. And he just mentioned how, one of the key words that he used was establishing habits. That's something that he said, he's definitely bringing to this team and that he wants them to be consistent with. And I think that's going to, that just shows that veteran leadership that Barnes is going to bring out there on the team. One thing that Barnes also did was that he gave a shout out to a young player in Blake Wesley. He said that, during open gym before training camp actually started, he really noticed how Blake Wesley was being super aggressive, especially on defense and just his hustle and his energy. And even though, Barnes isn't the Spurs' GM, that's still good. The fact that Wesley's getting a shout out from one of the veteran players on this team because Wesley and Malaki Branham, who I'm going to discuss later, they both have a very a crucial October coming up where by the end of this month, the Spurs need to decide whether or not they're going to exercise their team options for next season. So again, this is a big October for both Wesley and Branham, as I've mentioned here on the Spot Up Pod and also on the Spot Up Shot newsletter. But that's just a big sign of encouragement, the fact that a veteran is out there shouting out Blake Wesley and the work that he's put in. And then finally, something that Jeremy Sochan said about having Harrison Barnes on the team is that he just said he brings a very calming presence to the team. He doesn't play a very rush style. He's always kind of, just showing that leadership skills out there for the team. The next player I want to discuss is Devin Vassell. So mainly what I want to focus on with his comments was just kind of, he talked about why he's now, starting the season on the injured list, unfortunately. So basically, when Devin went out with that foot injury last season in the final 8 games of the regular season, he said that the first protocol was to basically let the injury heal itself. Well, come basically like June, that the injury still was not healing on its own, and so finally, he and the team decided he needed surgery, off-season surgery. So he did have that surgery on June 26th. He said it was his mom's birthday on that day, and now he's still in that recovery process. And so again, he's not guaranteed to be back by November 1st, but at least on November 1st, they're going to reevaluate and see exactly where he's at in his recovery process with that foot injury. So again, we don't quite know when Devin's making his return to the court. It will be at some point this season, hopefully early in the season. But again, as I mentioned on last week's episode, he's going to for sure miss the first 5 regular season games if he's not back by November 1st. And again, that's kind of where they put his timeline. Discussing Jeremy Sochan and some of his comments and also some comments that were mentioned by some of his teammates. So he's basically very thrilled this season. It's a totally different experience for Sochan compared from last year to this year, because at this point last year, he was getting ready to be thrown into the fire here in terms of having to run the point guard position. The Spurs were experimenting with that with that position for him for the first 20 games of the season. Obviously, it didn't work out very well, so they ended up going back to Trey Jones later in the season. And then, of course, this offseason, they signed Chris Paul. So now they have really good point guard play with both Chris Paul and Trey Jones running the point. But Sochan's actually thrilled to be back at his natural power forward role. Some things that he said he wants to do this year is just be consistent. He said, definitely play with energy on offense, shooting the wide open three if it's there for him to catch and shoot three. He's going to try to crash the glass on both ends of the court. He's going to attack his closeouts. And then, of course, on defense, he's ready to be the primary defender on whoever the Spurs need him to go out and guard. Like I said, he's a very versatile defender. He can go out and guard guards for games. He can go out and guard, wings, bigs. So Sochan's really, he at least gets to be in his natural role now there as the power forward. Regarding his shot, which is obviously something that he's continued to try to work on over the last few years, he did mention how he's been spending a lot of time with shooting coach for the Spurs, Jimmy Barron, and he's been working on his shot, on his shot release, on his what do you say, his form. He said visually, like, you'll be able to see a noticeable difference in his jump shot from this coming year compared to last year. And he did mention that for him, he's basically like a perfectionist, and for him, it's really hard. He has to be patient. He knows that in one day it's not going to go from being that really consistent kind of shot. It's going to take a lot of time. So again, and this is a big offseason for, not big offseason, but a big season for Sochan, because as I've written on the Spot Up Shot, next off season is when the Spurs have to decide if they want to give him a contract extension. So again, not this summer, not this coming season, but next off season, when next summer comes, the Spurs need to make that decision of whether or not they're going to try to work with Sochan on an extension. And of course, I think a big part of that will be, how much offensive improvement does he make in this coming season? And, big part of that offensive improvement will be his 3-point shot. Looking at some of the comments regarding Stephon Castle, the Spurs' rookie, who they drafted with the 4th pick in the 2024 NBA draft. Basically, what Castle mentioned was that, obviously one of the knocks on his game coming into the season was similar to Sochan's, which is his 3-point shot. He says that basically since Summer League ended, he's really worked on just getting reps up on his 3-point shot. So that's something that he's definitely been working on. He also knows that, with Chris Paul being here, with Trey Jones being on the team now, he's going to be playing more off ball. So he's definitely prepared himself that way as well. He knows he probably won't be the team's primary point guard coming into the season. And then one thing he noted was that how, obviously he's known for his defense, his perimeter defense, but that's something that he really wanted to use out early in training camp and also in open gym, just to basically get the trust and respect of his teammates, is that he's going to go out there and he's going to defend first. And that's really one of the reasons why the Spurs drafted him, is that he's one of the better defenders coming into this draft. So obviously, Stephon's been out there trying to earn his teammates' respect regarding his defense. And then some things that his teammates said about him early on is that Zach Collins has said what others have said before, is that he's very calm, he's very poised for being just a rookie. He's definitely very patient. Zach also mentioned how he's very strong, that like when Stephon comes off a pick and roll, it's hard to push him off of his spots. He definitely has a lot of body size out there to fight off that physicality. And then something Trey Jones mentioned was how for a rookie, it's very rare for a rookie to kind of play at their own pace, and he says Stephon always does that. He's very poised, he's very paced. He has a really good pace to him. He doesn't get rushed for being such a young player coming into the league. And then finally, Malaki Branham spoke with the media on Wednesday, and so here were some of the takeaways from his interview. He also mentioned how he didn't really have to work on his form. Malaki does have good form on his jump shot. The big issue for him over the last 2 years of his NBA career have been more so consistency. He just hasn't shot a consistent percentage from three. So he said that in order to the way to improve that was for him to get more reps on his three. So he says that's something he's really focused on his 3-point shot, is his reps. He also mentioned how he's really worked on his defense over the summer, and one of the players who kind of worked with him on that as far as being competitive was Blake Wesley, who's known for his defense. So he says that him and Blake, after open gyms in the summer, they both played a lot of one-on-one against each other. So he's obviously picked up some things defensively, probably from Wesley. And so he says that's one thing you're going to see from him, is his improved defense. And then, like I mentioned, regarding Wesley and both Branham, they do have that team option coming up on the last day of this month, which is October 1st, where the Spurs have to decide if they're going to exercise the team options for either player, which would allow the player to return next year under contract. If not, whoever doesn't get the exercised team option, that player will become a free agent next summer. So here's I just want to read the whole quote when Branham was asked about the team option coming up. He said this. He said, "I'm here putting in work every single day. It just depends on what they want to do. But I'm going to work hard. I'm going to do what I need to do." So again, there's Branham saying that he's going to control what he can control. He can only control how much effort and work he puts into his game. And now it's up to the Spurs front office to decide whether they want him part of the future, he and Wesley, or not. And so that decision will be coming up soon. As I mentioned before, the Spurs have a little bit of a trial here to get some last samples of data on both Wesley and Branham, basically, because they're going to get all of training camp, which is this week. They're going to get all of the preseason. And then if they want, I mean, they could really take this decision all the way to the end of the month, which would be like 2 or 3 regular season games. The Spurs typically, historically, they announce these decisions in about mid-October. They'll know by like either right when the preseason is about to end or right when it concludes. They'll make that notice of whether or not they're going to exercise the team options for Branham and Wesley. So again, those are just some basically taking a lot of information, which is a lot of quotes. That's really what all this is right now when it's training camp, is that it's just a lot of quotes. We obviously we haven't seen a lot of film and things like that on the players, but that's kind of what I want to do, is just kind of pick apart some of the big takeaways from the players and Coach Pop, and kind of put it here in the Spot Up Pod. Again, I really do encourage you to subscribe to the Spot Up Shot newsletter over on Substack. You just go to the spotupshot.com, because on there I usually I'll get these quotes, or even after a game I'll watch the game and write about it first. It's always going to be, my written form is going to always be first before I come to the podcast. So my podcast is more so where I kind of reiterate what I discussed there in the written form, but also give more expanded thoughts. And that's the time when I get to think a little bit more and just give some more details I may not have caught myself saying in the original write-up. So again, I definitely encourage you to subscribe to the Spot Up Shot newsletter. But again, thank you again for listening to the Spot Up Shot. To the Spot Up Pod. And then also, again, visually, if you want to see some visuals, maybe some quotes from here, I'm going to definitely put some visuals in the video format of this episode.